Hi, everybody. Hey, welcome to Becoming Her Again. I'm Renee Marie. I'm super happy to have you here. Thank you for joining me. If you've not been here before, I just kind of want to give a small amount of explanation as to what my channel is for. So, I have this channel, it's for other women healing during heartbreak, divorce, betrayal, loss, or a major life change, whether it's losing a job or, becoming an empty nester or whatever that looks like in your life. So Lily and I, this is Lily. We are here to help you through your journey, and I'm here to walk alongside you during this transition in this new chapter of your life. So, a lot of times women have, just lost pieces of themselves along the way, and I hope to be able to bring forth some of the things I've been through so you're able to learn how to rebuild at that time, during the time that you need to go through that. So, this isn't becoming her isn't about who you were before. It's really about discovering who you want to become now in your life. So, you're a new person, you've been through a lot of changes, and a lot of times with changes, you're able to find a different path to take. And a lot of times along the way in finding that different path also comes, more confidence in who you are as a person. Really, maybe for the first time in your life, you're just finding out who you are, like how you identify, right? And you're learning to have peace and hope again in your life. So I just wanted to kind of explain, what this channel is here for, and I hope that I'm able to help you along your journey. And I'm just really glad that you're here. So thank you for taking the time to drop in. So last week, we talked about when love becomes emotional manipulation. And today I want to actually talk about boundaries. So I've been talking about boundaries, right? So today it's finally here. And I want you to think about, so boundaries, what if the boundary was never about controlling the other person, right? So that's really the core of the message that I want to bring across today. So, that's one of the reasons that I didn't get into this topic right away. I really wanted to make sure that I had taken a lot of time to think this through, because I really felt that the message needed to be different other than it just being about boundaries, right? So as I talk about this, I'll explain as well a little bit about myself, along the journey that I've gone through, and boundaries and just in general, in that sense, right? So, I just, wanted to kind of just like get into this and just start talking about, like, so many times, like, I think boundary conversations are like, oh, well, we're just supposed to set a boundary, and then the other person is just supposed to show up, respect the boundary, and never cross that line, right? And it just doesn't seem that I have ever, in my personal journey, that I've ever really experienced that people just respect that, and then it just goes the way that we would like it to, right? Because if that was the case, then I guess everybody would have boundaries, and then nobody would ever feel like somebody crossed their boundary. So, I have a hard time with the word boundary, technically. I mean, because I think that there's just not a very clear definition as to exactly what this means, right? So, I don't know about you guys, but I just kind of kept thinking, like, well, so I set a boundary, and then like, honestly, what's going to happen? I mean, it doesn't really matter if I set the boundary, right? I mean, it really just doesn't matter. I can set it all day long. If the other person doesn't respect it, then, it doesn't matter. So that's kind of, one of the biggest things that, I know I kept thinking about. And as I was doing this message and like really getting into the core of it, I really, kept thinking about, like, well, what happens now, right? Like, you want to set this boundary, but then what? Like, if they're not going to really even, if it's not going to matter to the other person, then, well, where does that leave us, right? So, because setting the boundary doesn't automatically mean that you personally are emotionally free. So, you know, like you can set the boundary all day long, and it doesn't really matter because you're the one who's still going to be worrying about it. Like you're going to be worrying about that boundary. So, you know, I don't know about like any of you out there, but you know, a boundary was something that throughout my marriage that I did not have in place. You know, I really believed at the time that, excuse me, that really just like being an understanding person, being caring, and you know, trying to compromise, you know, keeping the peace, you know, putting others' needs before my own, that really that's what a good wife meant or like was to do, right? And there wasn't room for a boundary. I honestly, you've probably heard me talk about in other videos if you have stopped into my channel. I didn't even know what a boundary was, to be quite honest with you. I had one boundary ever, and it was never paid any attention to. So, you know, and the whole purpose of this conversation is to learn how we can better protect ourselves, right? So it's not about really the past or what happened in the past. It's really about learning to move forward, and how do we do that, and how do we do this where we're also comfortable with doing this. So, you know, the biggest problem is like when we don't have boundaries set in place. You know, a lot of times, you know, we start losing pieces of ourselves along the way because there's nothing that's there to protect us, right? It's just, you know, it's a free for all. Like anybody can do whatever they want. And quite honestly, they probably will if there is no boundaries or if there's nothing established, you know, on how the other person is going to treat you. So most likely what's going to happen is they're going to treat you however they choose because, you know, why would they not? Because you're not going to do anything, right? Like that's probably what they're thinking. So what I don't want to happen to you is kind of what happened to me. So I realized after the relationship that I was in was over that I did not know how to protect myself emotionally. So when, you know, when there are no boundaries, when there's nothing in place, then we just are so vulnerable to another person. And, you know, again, this isn't about the other person, but this is about us and our things. So, you know, we need to realize that we need to protect ourselves emotionally. We cannot be trampled all over emotionally. It is unfair, it is not okay, and it will absolutely break us and shatter us into pieces. And we don't want to be left, you know, in this situation where we're so vulnerable and we have just been literally shoved into the ground, right? And so it's not okay. So what do we need to do? So we need to be able to establish a boundary, and we need to be able to establish boundaries and it not just be about the other person, because the boundary technically is about us. So this is where we really need to understand this. I think that one of the things that I had to learn during my healing, you know, is you know, how do I protect myself moving forward emotionally? Because I can't go through this ever again. Like this isn't an okay thing. And what does a healthy boundary look like? Like you know, of course, if you have no knowledge of something, you don't have any way to really, you have nothing to base it on, right? So if there's no understanding of what a boundary even was, let alone if the one was in place, well, there certainly is not going to be an understanding as to how to move forward with boundaries. So here's what I want you to understand. I believe it's beyond us just saying, hey, Joe Schmo, this is my boundary and I don't want you to cross it, right? Like, I mean, why does Joe Schmo care if you cross it or you don't? Or if they cross it or they don't, right? Like, it doesn't matter to them. But here's what you should do. You wanted to understand what boundaries actually reveal about us, right? Like, so, I think that it's about how we view it, and we need to change our thinking about the boundary. Because what if the boundary was never meant to control them? What if the boundary was meant to reveal to us what still controls us? This is where I think it's such a big difference. And this is what I could never quite understand or grasp when I would talk about boundaries, or other people maybe have talked about them. And this has been within my healing journey, right? Like, I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, I could set a boundary all day long, every day of the week, and it's not really going to matter. But the truth is, what does it reveal about us on what is still controlling us? So let me explain what I mean, okay? You can tell somebody all day long, don't talk to me like this. If you talk to me like this, I'm going to walk away, and, I'm going to be so sick and tired of this, and we're not going to talk for 2 weeks, or, whatever it could be. But then what happens after you set those boundaries for that person? Number one, we already know they're probably running all over the boundary line, right? It doesn't really matter to them. But what happens to us? Because again, we want this to be about us, because, they are who they are, and they have their own issues that they need to work on. But we also have our own issues that we also need to work on. And so we need to look inward to be able to figure out, what are we doing here that can be done differently, because maybe we're not doing this the right way. Because here's what happens after you set that boundary and they're still running all over you. You're waiting on them to respond to you, right? You're waiting for their next text message. You're waiting for them to call you. You're waiting for them to just, show up and not act like they're mad, right? You're hoping that they'll understand why you set the boundary, because you're so concerned about the boundary, because it upsets you that you even had to set a boundary, right? Are you still checking your phone to see what's going on? Are you saying, hey, are you feeling okay over there because I set this boundary? And are you questioning, did you do the right thing or did you not? Because really, that's the bottom line. It really doesn't matter that we set the boundary. What matters is what happens to us after the boundary has been set. And quite honestly, how many of us out there are freaking out about it? Well, probably the majority of us. So this is where I feel like things need to be different with boundaries. And I think we need to ask ourselves, is their response... if their response still determines my emotional state, are they still controlling part of me? So if their response to the boundary still determines your emotional state and how you're feeling about this, are they still controlling part of you? It's a good question. It's an in-depth question. And I think many of us probably would answer that, if we're honest with ourselves, with yes. Yes, it is still they are still controlling part of us, right? A boundary is not to be a demand. I mean, a demand, you can demand things, but a boundary isn't supposed to be that. A boundary shouldn't say, you need to stop treating me this way. You need to show me respect. You better be respectful. You need to understand what I'm saying. You need to not cross my boundary line. But a boundary should say, if you speak to me disrespectfully, I'm going to end the conversation. I'm not going to participate in this any longer, because you're not respecting me in this moment and you're crossing my boundary. If this continues, I need to walk away from the conversation. And then that emotionally keeps you intact, right? If we did that. And there's a big difference between a demand and a boundary, because a demand is focusing on what they need to do. So meaning you can't do this to me. You can't say that. You can't act this way. But the boundary is focusing on what you will do. And I want to be very clear here because I had one boundary. I know I've said that before in my past. I've had one boundary in my past, and it was about what I would do. But then I continue to allow myself to not do that because I didn't want to hurt anything. I didn't want to upset anybody. I didn't want to rock the boat, right? So I continued to stay in the situation rather than remove myself when need be, because there's always times that we do need to remove ourselves, and especially if it's becoming a hostile situation, or in a situation where it's very toxic, and you're arguing with one another and you're not getting anywhere. Well, at some point or another, somebody needs to do something, right? So again, so if this boundary is focusing on what you need to do and what you will do, don't back down from that like I did in the past. That was way in the past, but just an example. Because here's the thing, we can't control their behavior, their feelings, their responses, what they're going to say, what they're not going to say, whether they're going to agree with us or they don't agree with us. We can't control any of that. They can say whatever they want. They can gaslight us. They can manipulate us. They can change the story. They can tell us that we're crazy or that we're too emotional or that we're too dramatic. They can say all of that stuff. And we can't control them. But what we can control is our participation in it and our responses to it, and then our choices, and whether or not we're going to continue to listen to it or if we're going to walk away, and if we're going to follow through on the boundary that we set into place. So if the boundary's been established and we bolt, well, you know what, pumpkin seeds, like honestly, you already knew I was going to leave because I already told you that was my boundary line. And so then we stay true to ourselves, you know what I mean? And then we are protecting ourselves. Again, this comes down to us, but we're protecting ourselves emotionally. And we need to emotionally protect ourselves because the other person is not there to emotionally protect us, because they don't care, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing to begin with. So they're certainly not worrying about us and our emotional well-being. So, that's something that we really, really need to focus on when we're talking about these boundary lines. So, imagine telling someone, right, like, I'm not going to continue this conversation if you're going to keep speaking to me disrespectfully. And then they get mad, right? And then they, start accusing you of, just kind of like what I was just saying, like being dramatic and, saying that you're too selfish or thinking that you're better than them. But what happens in that moment inside of us when this happens? Think about that. You start explaining more. You start over explaining. You start saying, well, wait, maybe I didn't say it the right way. Let me start over and restart the conversation, and I can explain it better, right? Then some of you apologize, right? There's many of us that just apologize our ways through it. And you try so hard with all of your existence and your energy to make them understand. And then a lot of times you take the boundary back because now's the time, why would you, well, you don't want to make them feel bad, right? I mean, I don't want to make them feel bad. So, I'm trying so hard to make them understand. Maybe I'll just take the boundary away. And then that way they'll really understand how much they matter to me. Like, think about that. That's wild. But we do it, we do it. So many of us do this. But what if we say, I will not abandon myself because you're unhappy with my boundary. I mean, this is your boundary, This is your boundary. And you can have a boundary. And the boundary should be there to keep people in a safe situation, honestly. Like, I don't know about you, but that's how I look at boundaries. I'm not looking at boundaries like, well, you show up and you just say, one slight thing and, we're going to have a big problem. I mean, but if there are like, honestly, like people that are pushing your buttons and they're doing this on purpose and they know that they're doing this on purpose, they are showing up toxic. They're showing up to the table with all of their weapons, they're pulling them all out, just jabbing you, left and right. You know what? This boundary is there to protect ourselves, not them. This isn't about them. This is about us. And we don't want to stoop to their level, right? And how many times do we stoop to a level of a person like that because they have pushed and pushed and pushed and prodded so much to the point where you can't even think straight. Now you don't even actually know what the conversation was about. You know why? Because you stayed in it so long, you never walked away, and you have no idea what's going on because now you're in just actually a tsunami, and like your entire being has been shaken. And so now emotionally you're falling apart because, there was nothing set in place. And if you did have it in place, you just said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it because, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Yeah, I mean, we need to really look at this, for ourselves. So, and so many times, as these conversations get deeper, there's such an attachment. You emotionally are attaching to their responses. So whatever that is, and as these conversations go deeper and deeper and deeper, you are so emotionally invested that you don't know even how to get out because nothing has been set into place. Nothing's there. So sometimes, we physically create the distance by remaining emotionally attached to this person's reaction. We need to be able to say, hey, yo, like I need to create this distance because otherwise I'm going to react. And what's going to happen to me now is I'm going to react in a very negative way. And this is only going to become worse. The outcome of this is going to get worse and worse and worse. And, so many times too, like, we're hoping that we're just, we're relieved because what if we did set the boundary and they finally respected it? We're relieved. And, and the emotional attachment to their responses so many times, like, it's just so many different scenarios go into this. Like you set the boundary, you're relieved because they respected it, right? And then, or what if they become angry? Then you feel guilty. What if, they apologize? Then, you feel like you got validation for this. And then they ignore you. You feel rejected. They come back and now you feel hopeful again. Then they don't come back and they've left you feeling abandoned. They've abandoned you and you're questioning who you are as a person and questioning yourself. And so you have to ask yourself, what am I still allowing their responses to do to me and determine how I feel, right? I mean, it's just not okay. Like everything cannot circle back to them. What about us? We have emotions also. And I think that we need to really look inward to be able to see if like sometimes, are we giving someone else the power of our emotional state of mind? And so many times the answer is absolutely we are. Especially when we're the people pleasers, we're the people who are empathetic. We have so much compassion for others. That's our whole thing, right? We go out of our way to take care of everybody. We're the caretakers. We're the ones that's out there, whatever it is that you need, my love, right? And, they just took away your emotional well-being. You literally handed it to them in a box and said, here you go, just go ahead and smash it into the ground. I know I know you don't care about me, but, I also don't want to hurt your feelings by giving you a boundary. It's crazy to think about what we do and what we allow these people to get by with. And yeah, and they're probably somebody that you trust very much, I mean, I understand that and I get that. But you know what? When they're showing up and they're showing us the reality of who they are, we really need to step back and we need to look at that. And I'm going to tell you, and I think I've brought this up before, we have that still small voice inside of us. And so many times, how many times do we know that something feels off? And if you feel it, I promise you it's off. If you feel it's off, and there's something going on that you might not know about. But I'm going to tell you, go with that deep, that small voice inside you, because that is there for a reason, It really is. So what do we do, like, if you've been through a breakup, and you're trying to figure out, how do I put together a boundary, or should I even have a boundary? Well, let's talk about that, because I think this is a big one for a lot of people, What does a boundary look like after a breakup? So if you've just recently gone through, a divorce, a breakup, whatever, you're moving on, do yourself a favor and don't go check their social media. Get them off of your social media. They don't deserve to be on your social media page. You only hurt yourself. You know what I mean? If you're checking up on them, who cares? Like, honestly, who cares? And I want you to remember that when you are struggling with this, and if you are a person who struggles with checking this, because I know a lot of people do, they struggle, remind yourself, why do you want to put yourself through seeing any of that for a person who's done all of this damage to you? They're the ones who caused this grief and this hurt onto you and into your life. And you are emotionally upset and distraught and a lot of times shattered over this person. So the last thing that you want to try to do is avoid their social media at all cost. And honestly, I would remove them from that immediately. I really would. You will save yourself so much grief and heartache. Who cares? It's not worth it. It's not worth your time, your energy, and especially is not worth your emotional well-being. It is not worth that. Block them. Block them from your phone. They should have not the right or the access to you, period, plain and simple. And maybe you've done those things and then you start wondering, well, did they even notice? Are they upset with me because I blocked them? Are they going to reach out to me? Do they even miss me? Have they moved on? And your healing does not depend on whether or not that they noticed if you stepped away or if you stayed, right? It doesn't matter. Your decision does not need their approval, and your healing doesn't require their acknowledgement. They're not going to give that to you anyway, so many times. And your peace in your life doesn't require their participation. They didn't bring peace to your life when they were with you, probably. So I'm sure they're not going to bring it to your life now. And it's a big deal. And you got to put yourself first. You really do. And I'll give you another example. You might ask yourself why they don't respect your boundary. And you can just say, I'm not going to continue this conversation while you're yelling at me or while you're talking to me like that. And then they just continue. And then the boundary has to become the next action. And so many times I don't think that we know what to do, right? Like when that happens. Because maybe maybe the boundary isn't, hey, you have to stop yelling. Maybe the boundary is, I'm ending the conversation and I'm walking away, or you hang up the phone and get off the phone, or you leave, or you don't let them keep on responding. Once the conversation's done and the boundary is being crossed, you have to stop letting them do this to you. And the hard part is what comes after it, because you're the one who feels guilty. You're the one who is missing that person. You're the one who's feeling bad. You're the one who feels like you need to over-explain, right? You're questioning your own self. But what if the boundary is often tested, when you're honoring it and it's becoming emotionally uncomfortable? Because that's the time that this is where it's really gonna matter. And so then I want to ask you too, what is the boundary revealing for yourself? A lot of times boundaries are revealing that you still need their approval. And many of us do. If you're still in a toxic situation, an abusive relationship, whatever that is for yourself, this is a lot of times where you're at. You're still looking for their approval. You're needing them to understand. That's why you just keep on re-saying everything, but just in a different way, You're still needing their apology. I still need them to admit that they hurt me. I still want them to choose me. These are all the things you're saying to yourself. I still need them to see how much worth I am and show respect for me. I still need their reaction to tell me that I made the right decision. And instead of judging ourselves, we honestly can just simply notice, like, oh, this is still the power that they have over me. And it's not to feel that you're a failure. It's bringing awareness to this, right? Because if you're feeling all those things that I just listed out, these are things that you need to work on. This is awareness to remind you that these are the things that maybe you're still struggling with. They still have control over you. And, that's not healthy for you. They shouldn't have control over you. And, I want to tell you that, boundaries, like I've heard some people like talk about like boundaries, like maybe make you cold, like as a person. But boundaries that doesn't define you as like being cold to other people. You can still be loving and kind and compassionate and forgiving and have boundaries. Boundaries are not to be, they're not punishment, you know what I mean? And they're not walls. Like, they're your protection. They're your protection. And if somebody chooses to keep crossing those, then that has to be fully looked at. And that's when you really need to decide, is this something that, that they've got this control over me on, because, they are continuing to cross my boundaries, and that is a big problem. And, boundaries don't make you less loving. They teach you that loving someone doesn't require you to abandon yourself. And if somebody really truly loves you, don't you think that they wouldn't want you to abandon yourself? Seriously, think about that. Like, I can't even imagine the people that I have loved in my life. And I would never want them to abandon themselves. I always would have hoped that they, were who they were as a person, and, they always were true to themselves. I would have never thought that. So, but many times, people are not looking out for your greater good. So that's the issue. So I think you need to ask yourself, and I think we all do, is what if the person I need a boundary with is me? So we need the boundary to protect ourselves, So like, I'll give you examples. So you're going to tell yourself, I need a boundary. And these are examples. I need a boundary. I'm not going to check their social media page anymore. Maybe you're going to take it a step further and say, I'm going to block them from social media so you can never ever see it. I'm not going to read and reread old messages from this person. I'm not going to chase them and hope that one day they apologize. I'm not going to keep explaining my worth to this person. I'm not going to continue to return to them and continuously show up for them when they keep hurting me. And maybe you're going to say, I will not sacrifice my peace to avoid someone else's disappointment. And I will not abandon myself to keep someone else in my life. Because, that's the reality of it. We need the boundary for ourselves. So that way we stay where we need to be. So they can't emotionally destroy us. No matter who it is, right? And it's not that everybody goes around emotionally destroying people, don't get me wrong. But when there are things that have continuously happened, and these things are stacking up in negative ways, then we need to look inward and we need to say, yikes, what are we going to do here to make sure we're protecting ourselves? And this is where the boundaries matter. This is where they matter. The boundary isn't just what I'm asking you to stop doing to me, right? It's about what I'm finally refusing to allow someone to do to me. I'm refusing that. I'm not going to allow it. I hope it makes sense because it's a different way to look at boundaries, right? And so I hope this is making sense to you, and I hope it's clicking. A boundary might not change them. I mean, and most likely it won't. I mean, honestly, many times, like I said, they may just run right through your boundary. It might not even make them understand. It might not make them apologize. It might not ever make them try to save the relationship. But here's what it can do. It can change you. And it can teach us things about ourselves. And this is where I'm going to give you a couple more examples of my own self. This is where I couldn't put it into words about the boundaries, but this is where I was like, absolutely no on the social media stuff. I absolutely refuse to have that in my face. And, I blocked the person from that being able to access me. There's no more of that. So what it started to do to me, now, not from the very second that I started doing this, but as I went through it, I started to learn that, what? I am showing up for myself. I am protecting myself. I'm choosing myself. and I'm choosing peace, and I'm going to stand by my word to myself that I am not going to continue to allow somebody to do this to me. I have not only walked away, but now I'm walking away again in a different sense. I'm saying, no, you're not going to treat me this way. And if you can't be kind enough to have a conversation with me as an adult, then I will no longer allow access for you to me, right? So it started to teach me different ways about showing up for myself. I didn't have to abandon myself to keep someone else in my life, because you know what? I'm going to choose myself now. I'm going to show up for me now. So that's the shift. And that's what I think, that if you're able to think about this and to really put this into practice, I think you're really going to see such a huge difference. A lot of times, we have to know, and this is one of the things about becoming her again, we're trying to become the woman that we need to become again. And, she needs to know that you're going to show up for her and take care of her. And, that you're going to say, hey, this is what I value. And this is what I do and do not tolerate, right? And that I'm allowed to say no. That I can love a person without losing myself. Maybe the woman you're becoming isn't the woman that never gets hurt. Maybe she's a woman who no longer abandons herself when she does get hurt. Because many times I think that's what we do. We get hurt and then we say, oh, well, you'll be fine, right? And we don't even really take time to comfort ourselves and look at ourselves and work inwardly about what maybe we need to resolve this. So I really hope that this sits with you. I hope it resonates with you, and I hope it makes sense. I want to ask you some questions. What boundaries have you been afraid to set? Because I'm sure there's a lot that you've been afraid to set. What are you afraid will happen if you do set the boundary? What does their reaction of the boundary do to you? How does it make you feel? Why do you need them to respond a certain way to the boundary that you set? And what happens if you honor your boundary regardless of their response? What happens? And those are just, some questions to think about, and your boundary doesn't need their approval to be valid. Your healing doesn't need their participation. And your decision to choose yourself does not require them to understand why. It just is what it is, right? Because you are picking yourself and you matter. And I don't want you to forget, as you're going through this, write this stuff down, come back to it in your journal. And, I don't want you to be fearful of this. If you're struggling with boundaries, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are so many people out there that struggle with this, but I really believe little by little, as you begin to choose yourself and not abandon yourself, you're going to start understanding how to do this. And it's okay if you mess up, we're not perfect people. So just do the best you can, and don't forget to just stack your things, little by little, and you're going to get better and better each and every day. And I don't want you to forget that, and because maybe becoming her again isn't about finding the woman that you used to be, but maybe it's about becoming the woman who finally knows she doesn't have to abandon herself to be loved. You never know, but I think that that sounds better than the alternative. And, show up for yourself. You've got this, man. And, yeah, and I just want you to give yourself grace and have a peaceful day and just enjoy your day, enjoy your silence, and think about this when you have time. And I hope that this helps you all. All right, you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care, friends.